Thank you for joining us this evening. It is Thursday, November 4th. Welcome to another edition of the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. Thank you for joining us this evening. I seem to be repeating myself. In any case, this is the first one without my illustrious co-chair, Director Edwards. So big loss with her, but she has gone on to great things as well and sends her love and regards to all of you. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded tonight. And if you don't mind just putting the agenda in the chat, we are going to go over goals and action statements from our groups. We're going to provide a little bit of time for folks to connect with their group. And also, we are going to make sure that moving forward, each subcommittee has something to focus on. So for some reason, Ann, that doc seems to be restricted. It says you need access. So moving right along, and again, welcome to everybody who I see coming on. We are going to start with a rounds question, I believe, and I'm going to turn it to Ann to pose the question.
Great. As we enter November, I was going to say as we enter Thanksgiving, we're not quite there yet, but as we enter November, we are going to break into groups of 3 today and just share one thing that we're grateful for. So we will regroup in approximately 3 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and open rooms now. We'll actually regroup at 5:37. If folks need help getting to their room, tomorrow I have you here in case more people join here. So one thing, hi, I feel like I know everyone, and I feel like you all may know each other pretty well at this point too, but I'm Ann. And one thing I'm grateful for right now, I'm grateful for the cooler weather. I like the change in seasons. There's something to the change that helps me feel like I'm turning over a new leaf and there's opportunity to kind of reset. And the last part of the year, it's funny, I don't do New Year's resolutions in the same way that I'm like, I'm going to finish the year strong. So I get really energized at this time of year. I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome. I am grateful for the vaccine being approved for 5 to 11-year-olds because I have a 10-year-old and also just so many kids can benefit. So that's my gratitude right now.
Yes. Mine are 3 and 6 and 9. So 2 of them get it.
Awesome. Mm-hmm.
We are over the moon. Okay, it looks like we have Colby joining us. And I always hate to put people on the spot, like right as they hop in. Hi, Colby, how are you?
I'm doing well. Do you need to put me on the spot?
I am. We're just sharing one thing we're grateful for.
Oh, I'm grateful for food and sharing food with other people who I love.
Yes, that's one of the things I miss so much is gathering with people and having meals to share. So
yeah,
thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Hi, Erica. We are just sharing one thing we're grateful for.
Is it my turn?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hi.
Hi,
Hi. One thing that I am grateful for is I'm really grateful for an inner circle who really pays attention to my emotions and tells me when I need to eat and when I need to take a nap and when I need to cry and when I need to let something go and when I need to fight harder. You know, like they really ride with me. They tell me when I'm wrong, you know. So I'm very grateful that I have a loving type of.
That's wonderful. Excuse me. Thank you for sharing, Erica.
Hey, Erica, it's good to hear. It's good to hear you. Hey. All right. So welcome back. A lot to be grateful for. Today, we are going to hear a diversity, equity, and inclusion presentation on intergenerational trauma by Dr. Lindsey Gavin. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Fariha to introduce it.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a great evening. I'm really, really excited for Dr. Gavin to present. She's incredible and just does a lot of amazing work with the youth. And she's going to talk about the impact of intergenerational trauma. Thank you, Dr. Gavin.
Thank you, Fariha, and thank you, Zeke. I'm so excited to be able to talk with everybody today about this topic. And I just want to start off by saying I feel like we just how amazing all the resources and information have been so far in our presentations. I feel like we've already touched a little bit at different times on intergenerational trauma. So I hope to just expand, I think, what a lot of us have already learned about it. So I'm just going to share my screen so you all can see presentation. Okay. Did that pop up for everybody? Okay, awesome. All right, so the quote I have here from Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, it's important for us to know our history because we are carrying it. A lot of information I'm pulling today about intergenerational trauma is from Maria, Dr. Braveheart, who is one of the foremost researchers in this area of intergenerational trauma. I'm also going to reference a couple books throughout that I've also used to inform my presentation today. So what I want to start about is this just shared idea of like what we mean when we talk about trauma and what we mean when we talk about intergenerational trauma. So I think we all know that trauma is a pretty shared human condition that a lot of us will experience at one point or another, and that trauma is really powerful and that it has the power to spread across people and across time. And intergenerational trauma, or what's sometimes called transgenerational trauma, is what happens when unhealed and untreated trauma-related stress experienced by survivors is passed on to the second generation and then subsequent generations. Some people have the tendency to think that trauma is something that occurs solely within an individual, like a broken arm or a toothache, but trauma also routinely spreads between bodies and between people, like a contagious disease. And one of the concepts that I'm going to go into talking about is from Resmaa, who wrote the book My Grandmother's Hands, which if you haven't read it is a wonderful read on the impact of intergenerational trauma. And he talks about this idea of clean pain versus dirty pain. And clean pain is the pain that mends and can build our capacity for growth. So he talks about this idea that it's the pain that you feel when you know what to say or do after healing from trauma, even when you don't want to do it, or even when you don't want to say it, but you do it anyway. And you're responding from the best parts of yourself. And the idea of dirty pain is the pain after trauma, the pain of avoidance, of blame or denial, when you're responding from the most wounded parts of yourself. And he talks about this idea that when someone with unhealed trauma chooses dirty pain over clean pain, the person may try to soothe his or her trauma by blowing it into another person. And they can blow that into another person using violence, rage, coercion, deception, betrayal, emotional abuse, a lot of different means. And what happens is this never heals the trauma. Instead, it increases the first person's dirty pain by reinforcing the harmful and aggressive survival strategies that they're using. And then it also creates this sense of ongoing unease in their body that they have to try to override. What it can also do is provoke a reflexively defensive and aggressive response in this other person's body. So we can kind of see how that can spread from one person to another. Trauma also routinely spreads interpersonally, of course, and these images just speak to the many ways historically that trauma has spread interpersonally, because it has throughout human history in many different communities and cultures. So whenever one group oppresses, victimizes, brutalizes, or marginalizes another, many of those victimized people may suffer trauma and then pass that trauma response on to their children. Children are uniquely and highly susceptible to this because their nervous systems are young, and they're easily overwhelmed by things that are older, and more experienced nervous systems can typically override. And this will result in intergenerational trauma. We can also think about this as an idea of a settled body versus an unsettled body. So a settled body, again, is that body that's chosen clean pain, that's responding from the best parts of yourself, that's choosing to kind of remain present and focused, while an unsettled body has a lot of that agitation and irritation, is choosing kind of violence and aggression. So when one settled body encounters another settled body, this can create a sense of deeper settling in both bodies. But when an unsettled body encounters another, that unsettledness tends to compound in both of the bodies. This can happen between people, but it can also happen in groups. So like a peaceful crowd can turn into an angry mob. This also happens in our families, especially when multiple family members face painful or stressful situations together. And then we can see that kind of spread over time. After months or years, unhealed trauma can appear to become part of someone's personality. And we can suffer a lot of these responses to trauma. I know we've probably talked about a lot of these at different points in time, but suffering the effects of substance abuse, dissociation, violence, survivor's guilt, victim identity. So after so long, and it feels like the unhealed trauma is just becoming a part of who I am or a part of my personality, over even longer periods of time, as it's passed on and gets compounded through other bodies in a household, it can become a family norm. So I'm sure we can all think about our families and maybe things that just seem like, this is just what our family does. This is just how we are. And then if it gets transmitted and compounded through multiple families over multiple generations, it can start to look like culture. But it isn't culture. It's traumatic retention that's lost its context over time, but not its power. And these traumatic retentions can have a profound impact on what we do, how we think, what we believe, and what we find meaningful in life. This transference of trauma isn't just about how we treat one another either. It can be passed down genetically. So there's recent research that's shown that trauma can actually change the expression of the DNA in our cells. And this can get passed down from parent to child. We're only just beginning to understand this, but some studies have shown that a fetus growing inside the womb of a traumatized mother can inherit some of that trauma in its DNA expression. And this results in a repeated release of stress hormones in the baby. Other research studies have shown that a man with unhealed trauma can produce sperm with altered DNA expression that can inhibit the healthy functioning of cells in his children. Some of these effects have been particularly prevalent among African Americans, Native Americans, and Jewish Americans, which we all know are kind of three of many groups that have been experiencing an enormous amount of historical trauma. Sadly, over time, there is both, these unhealed and, unsettled ways to cope with intergenerational trauma. And then we have more positive and adaptive ways that we cope with it. So some of the positive ways are to find ways to become resilient, to choose resistance to oppression or fight oppression. However, there's often, unfortunately, many ways that individuals and families cope with intergenerational trauma by employing unhealthy coping strategies. And I've listed some of those here. So we have denial. So how many of us can think in our families or in our lives that at different points in times when traumatic experiences have occurred that we just refuse to acknowledge that it happened and that there's silence. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about those things. Or we choose minimizing them. So we're going to ignore the impact of that trauma and make the traumatic experience smaller than it really was. or we just dissociate, which is also a survival strategy. It's kind of just removing and disconnecting yourself from the experience. And the ways in which that we and our family members choose to cope with intergenerational trauma can set the precedence for younger generations. So, for example, a grandparent who's refused to examine the impact of their trauma may be unintentionally teaching their children and grandchildren to also ignore the impact of their trauma. And while oftentimes under such difficult oppressive circumstances, parents can kind of get into, you get into survival mode, and you may get past survival messages onto your children. So ideas like, don't ask for help, it's not safe, it's dangerous. These messages may have initially helped people to survive and stay alive, but in the present and being passed down, sometimes it loses its context and actually may increase stress and trauma rather than helping it to heal. So sooner or later, unfortunately, minimizing denial, silence, it doesn't work, because the trauma is likely to be triggered by something. And it's not something that you can hide from, unfortunately, no matter how hard you try to. We also know that trauma has a profound impact on the body itself. And so intergenerationally, we can see this impact as well over time of what trauma does to the body. So we have these ways in which the transmission of trauma impacts the structure of our brain, the neural pathways, brain waves, neurotransmitters. Oops, sorry, I don't know why I did that. It's also changes, again, that DNA on a DNA cellular level, can change the way that the cells are being formed, impacts the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system and how the hormones are being balanced in the system, as well as our immune response. That's why we see many groups that are exposed to intergenerational trauma often have co-occurring chronic medical health conditions like asthma, arthritis, diabetes, obesity. So now we've kind of reviewed how this intergenerational trauma can transmit and what it looks like in our bodies and in our cultures. I want to spend part of the presentation going over one example of this. So one example of this that I found in my readings of intergenerational trauma is the physical punishment of children, or what we call whooping our kids. And I pulled this information from a book, Stacey Patton, who's an advocate for anti-violence and anti-physical discipline of children. And she wrote a book called Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. So she goes into this deep historical research on trying to figure out the question of, why do we hit our kids? And I know I've thought about this as somebody who grew up in an interracial family where physical punishment was definitely a standard of practice, and it was the way that my parents were raised as kids, and their parents and their parents' parents. And she kind of stopped at one point and thought, like, why is this something that is rooted so much in our American culture, but also even really so much specifically in the African American culture and in our families? And so while physical punishment is so deeply rooted in this way of raising our children, history, through her historical analysis, she kind of finds this clear explanation of where it comes from. What she found is that these practices historically have no ties to African parenting practices and culture. We actually have to go back 2,000 years to European history. So for 2,000 years of European history, Europeans deliberately exploited, tortured, raped, and killed their own children. This was during the period of the Middle Ages, and about half of the babies born during that time were killed by their own caregivers. For centuries, Europeans grew up with severe beatings being a regular part of a child's life. Naturally, this harsh treatment of children, along with the desire for land, profit, fame, and a religious zeal to civilize and convert indigenous people to Christianity, bred a culture of adult violence, which drove conquest, colonization, slavery, and genocide. Ruling children through shame and harsh punishment was necessary because they were wicked, and their behaviors could bring the wrath of God down upon them and upon the community. So there was this Christian concept in that time that children were born wicked, so they had to be broken and civilized and have the devil beaten out of them. So this Christian concept that children were born innately wicked and shameful was not part of the broad cultural thinking of Native Americans or West African societies direct contact with European and European Americans. By the 17th century, white European children are starting to slowly get categorized as innocent, and therefore they need to be protected and have rights against this violent treatment, even though it kind of transitions still into schools. And we see a lot of this, particularly in religious schools, where this is physical punishment. Slowly over time, white children begin to be protected from this. So by the 19th century, with changing attitudes about children and their welfare, beatings gradually begin to decrease for white children, but it doesn't entirely disappear. It turns into a milder form of punishment that we call spanking now. But for centuries, childhood for Europeans was a period of systemic violence. And when Europeans sought to enslave Africans, they imposed the category of child onto them. And they modeled their racist systems of exploiting Black bodies in their ideologies about childhood and the brutal treatment of children. And they used that to justify enslavement and how they treated slaves. So long before the first Europeans even landed on our continent to build their model Christian nation, they had grown accustomed to doling out sexual and physical violence against their own children, whom, again, they were regarded as savages and devils. So this brutality cascades across generations and across continents and gets transferred into other cultures through slavery, through colonialism. And while white people gradually began sparing their own children from this brutality, it shouldn't be surprising then that this is getting transferred onto Black people, African slaves, who eventually inherit their oppressors' violence and carry it forward, much in the same way to their own children. So when the Puritans sail from Great Britain and they arrive in New England in the early 1600s, they are not only survivors of religious persecution, but survivors of a culture of profound violence and child abuse. And this history of abuse may explain why they were also so violent, not only with one another, but with indigenous communities and with enslaved Africans. By the 1680s, the escalation of the British slave trade brings about increasing numbers of the Africans to the colonies, and the enslavement of Africans on plantations in various parts of the South would dominate America's labor system. So torn from their homelands, these African slaves were thrust into this new violent culture where they were introduced to the most barbaric dimensions of European Christian worldview and its practices that didn't come from an authentically spiritual place, but were designed to ensure the profitability of the slavery enterprise. So before our ancestors arrived in America, this brutality was being transmitted generationally over time. Slaves were brutally seasoned by their overseers and masters, and soon our ancestors saw beating as an essential feature of child rearing, crucial to equipping their children with the skills they would need to survive the harsh realities of plantation life. So what does this look like generations later? Every year, there's more than 3.6 million referrals made to child protection agencies involving more than 6.6 million children that are being abused. The United States has one of the worst records among industrialized nations, and we lose about 4 to 7 children every day to child abuse and neglect. Child abuse and violence against children has profound impacts. We know this through a lot of research, that there's physical and mental health implications, financial and economic implications. And we know that children who experience child abuse are about 9 times more likely to become involved in criminal activity. So for me, finding out this research made me stop and think about, well, where did this come from in my family? And are we part of this intergenerational traumatic retention that has become to look like culture and that we call our own culture? But if we look far back enough, we don't see it in our culture, that it's actually a traumatic retention. So for us today, I hope that we can all use that example as a starting point in exploring our own histories of intergenerational trauma. So some questions you can use to consider for yourself are, when did your ancestors settle in this country? How did they come to be in this country? Were they escaping religious persecution? Were they immigrants forced to flee? What kind of traumatic experiences did they encounter on their way here? And how were they received when they settled in this country? Were they accepted and embraced into the American culture, or were they further marginalized and persecuted? What about your own mother and father? What traumatic events directly affected them? What about your grandparents? Some of us might know the answers to some of these questions and some of us might not. But I think it's a starting place for us to, in order to heal from these experiences, to start to think more critically about where our culture and family norms and practices come from and what is intertwined with trauma. So I know I only have a couple minutes left, but kind of looking forward, our task then is to try to mend our collective bodies. And in order to do that, we begin with the body. So there's few skills that are more essential than the ability to settle your body. If there's one thing that I want to make clear from my presentation and what I've learned is that if you can settle your body, you're more likely to be calm, alert, and fully present no matter what's going on around you. A settled body allows you to connect and harmonize with other bodies around you and encourage those bodies to settle as well. And a calm, settled body is really the foundation for healing, for health, and for helping others. And learning to settle your body and practice compassionate self-care through all these different means that we see here, exercising, meditation, getting good sleep, and eating well. It's not just about reducing stress. It's about increasing your body's ability to manage stress when it occurs and create more room for your body to find that coherence and flow and presence. These are some other ways kind of extending beyond creating a settled body that we want to try to move toward healing of this intergenerational trauma. And I think, again, first and foremost, we have to recognize and accept and move through the pain and trauma. We can't choose silence and minimization and dissociation, as we know that those never truly get us to a point of healing. We also have to harmonize with other bodies and find a way to connect and find coherence. And of course, and when you're talking about work dealing with oppression and systemic racism, we have to engage in activism and ways to create new culture that's not intertwined with traumatic retentions. So I just wanted to end today, if I can, if I have time. This will take about 5 minutes, if that's okay. But I wanted to end today with a moment for us to all to settle together in doing a mindfulness practice. So in order to do this, I wanted to ask if everyone could take a moment to try to focus on settling your body. And if everyone can start by just taking a few deep breaths. And you can either close your eyes or pick a spot on the wall to focus while I walk you all through a mindfulness meditation. So if everyone can just take a moment to take a few breaths. And I want you all to recall a time you can remember feeling that you were devalued by someone else. Not because of something you did or didn't do, but because of some aspect of who you are. There may be many situations or experiences, but try to focus in on one. I want you to allow yourself to recall how you reacted in this situation as you remember the details of it. What aspect of your identity were you aware of? Your gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, some other characteristic or a combination of these? Was there a person you were interacting with? Or was it a societal message? Or a disparity or inequity that you experienced? Notice in your body right now, any sensations, even if you haven't yet identified a specific situation. What does the word oppression feel like? What are your physical sensations, images, feelings, or thought reactions to that word? Perhaps there's a feeling of resistance, of not wanting to go to such a place. Try just breathing into that feeling. Stay with noticing, seeing if other feelings or thoughts or sensations emerge. I want you to recall that experience and say to yourself, this is a moment of difficulty, of suffering, or discomfort. Notice how your body responds to this acknowledgement. I want you to say to yourself, there are others who are like me, who have had similar experiences. I am not alone in having this experience. Then place your hand over your heart and feel the warmth of your hand comforting your heart. How does your body respond? I want you to breathe in the following phrases. May I find some sense of safety in this moment. May I feel strong in this moment. May I feel worthiness, even as I am being devalued by others. Repeat these phrases again and notice how your body responds to each one. Now bring your mind to another person you know who has had a similar type of oppressive experience, and picture the two of you standing together. And surrounding you, try picturing all of the many individuals who have faced this type of discrimination. May we feel safe when we have such challenging experiences. May we feel strong in the face of adversity. May we feel worthiness, even when others devalue us. And finally, picture all of those who have felt oppressed at some time in their life. May we feel safe when we have such challenging experiences. May we feel strong in the face of adversity. May we feel worthiness, even when others devalue us. Now just bring your awareness back to your breath right now and check in with how your body is feeling at this moment in time. What sensations have shifted? What has remained? Any thoughts or feelings that you're experiencing now? Take a couple deep breaths. And when you're ready, bring yourself back to the room. And with that, I would like to end my presentation and thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gavin. I didn't even realize how much my body needed that.
Please give a big, big, big virtual round of applause to Dr. Lindsey Gavin. Great presentation, and thank you for doing that. Really powerful. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Gavin. These have been absolutely fantastic. Fariha, thank you for keeping us organized on our DEI sessions, and looking forward to what comes next. All right, so in about 2 minutes, we are going to break into our committees and just have a quick 10-minute wrap about what we want to present. Again, we're going to present one goal from each committee to sort of share what we intend to work on. Each group is going to have about 5 minutes to share, and then there's going to be about 5 minutes for questions afterward. Just to give some context into what comes next, the goal here is we are now in a space to start working on our various goals and to really hone in on one goal in each of the committees and work collectively to get it done. We're also going to have an opportunity to present what we're working on. We were able to attain some of the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding through Shantae Jackson and the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood and Safety and Engagement, which is really exciting. And we've had a couple conversations with the mayor about bringing the task force back together in person outside and presenting what we all are working on to really update the public on what these amazing subcommittees have been doing and what we are going to continue to do. So that is all upcoming. Ultimately, we will also present in front of the city council. That is also written into the legislation. But for today, we are going to start by thinking through one goal. And again, the purpose of this is for each group to present and then for all of us to provide questions and just help to strengthen each other's work. So with that, Anne is gonna bloop everybody into our work groups, into our subcommittees, and we will come back at 6:17 and hear from a first group.
I'm going to stay here for just a second to make sure everyone gets where they need to be, but the policy group will stay here. And I think all of you are here tonight. You get the gold star for your committee having everyone here.
Awesome. All right, so should we just dig in? I know folks have been passing around on the WhatsApp. Nika and or Fariha, do you want to put up on the Zoom the slides?
Fariha, can you? Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Who all is going to present from our crew? Regina?
I did ask Regina would she present, and she said yes, and I'm happy to jump in if she can tag me in if need be.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. You want to just walk through like a practice session?
Sure. Essentially just going to talk about that. I think we have 5 goals total, and we decided to, I guess, present goal 4 as an example of the work that we've been doing and certainly the policies that we've been thinking about that have created or continue to, of course, reinforce trauma. And so the first thing we talked about, I think I just want to go through them individually and then go through them specifically. So the listening session, I'm going to look at it on my phone at the same time. Oh, sorry. Starting off with the listening session because we want to be fully aware of the traumas that people have faced, ones that we may not be privy of or not think about. 2, we want to essentially create consumption sites that would, which is a big concept around the country in some places, especially where folks could use safely, but in a space that has resources available. I know Nakia talked about, for instance, prescribing naloxone for those who suffer from substance use disorder, but making sure those things are on hand for those individuals. The point of a consumption site, one is to decriminalize to a degree. Folks who are suffering, they're going to use, and we would rather them use in a safe place where they can be watched and provide resources than be somewhere in a place where the likelihood of infection, disease, or death and overdose will more than likely happen. And then we talk about, I think the next one on my thing here is, oh, these are jumbled. I'm sorry, guys. I can't see this. Consensual adult sex work, decriminalization. I know there's been discussions about this in the chat, and I'm sorry, I was on a tour all day, so I tried to jump in where I could. But consensual, because we want to decriminalize or remove the shame in sex work, because what happens is that most folks get pushed to dark spaces, pushed to illegal, being in these situations illegally, are more prone to violence and violence against the individual who is essentially going to pay for services, but also empowers individuals to be able to go to a doctor, to get more condoms without shame, to be able to manage especially their physical and health and well-being, which the opposite pushes everybody differently. You know, when you're a sex worker, you hide. When you're a sex worker, you tend to work in places that are not safe, that are not clean, and that don't provide the best health or safe outcomes for you. So changing those policies would diminish some of the issues that are associated with sex work. The next one was, I think, marijuana, recreational marijuana. We talked about, of course, identifying residents who are incarcerated for marijuana possession and use, which is a majority, of course, of young Black individuals, and determine how many are incarcerated for sale and distribution. And we know that the state's attorney's office is still prosecuting drugs as it relates to distribution and selling, but not necessarily possession and use. And depending on what drug it is. And so decriminalization, of course, we know breaks up the market that's out there now. People are dying, and there's violence on the streets because of this. It would allow more folks to be in place to smoke. Those people who do smoke, who are pretty much on the cusp where they can't necessarily get a medical marijuana card, but can use it for some type of personal or health benefit that may not be available. But we talked about coordinating, of course, with police department, state's attorney's office, and being able to tackle that legislation. And just full disclosure, the General Assembly will be tackling recreational marijuana this session, whether it would be decriminalization or referendum. So that is good to know that we're already on top of that. And then I think the last one was environmental justice. And so, of course, the fair treatment and meaningful movement of all people, of course, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, of course, to respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. That's the EPA's essential definition, and most folks will have other definitions based off that. But essentially, reviewing policies in the following areas of environmental justice, especially historically, that have caused current environmental justice issues. You have to have an issue to have environmental justice. There are things that could be, there are things that could look like it. But zoning and land use is a huge one that has caused a lot of environmental justice. Industrial business standards, products, creations, and use. When we talk about lead paint and how the city allowed lead paint to continue to be used when they knew it was dangerous. Transportation, of course, is a huge environmental justice issue. air and water pollution, as well as air and water quality, housing and building codes that don't necessarily meet environmental standards. Of course, waste management, which is a big one right now. And then, of course, using the Baltimore's Office of Sustainability as a guide to help us bring forth or recommend policies at the, whether it's a state or the city level, to start to rectify these issues. So that's a summation, but I can certainly go into more detail. It's only 5 minutes, correct?
5 minutes.
Okay. And I have to, my computer gets wonky when I open up too many things. So I'm going to have to see if I can open and talk from the document in my computer and hope that my computer doesn't die on me in the meantime. But are we missing a member in our?
Yes. Kevin
Abby.
Daniels.
Oh yeah, we need to add.
Yeah, add Dr. Kevin, Dr. Daniels.
Is there anybody else that we need to add?
I think so. I don't know.
I don't think so.
All right, good stuff. Real quick, I had a great conversation today with the new executive director of BCRI. I put this on a little WhatsApp. If you all can, I think Ann sent like a date and a time. Would love to have us all get briefed. Really interesting, just in terms of like capacity constraints, and the city is asking them to do a lot more, including this 911 diversion stuff, with no more resources. So my thing to them was, you need to get some of the ARPA money, because otherwise, and like, you just need to get more money from the city, period, because otherwise we're setting you up for failure. Like, you can't do more with the same amount when, frankly, they're already stretched in a big way. So anyway, I really like this guy, Jonathan. I think he's a breath of fresh air. And I think they're a really important part of the puzzle. And so we should all meet with him. I think that'd be really good.
You said Ann sent out a date. Was it in the?
I haven't seen. I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it.
Or
Did I make that up? I thought she emailed you all.
She may just not have gotten to it as yet.
I'm sure she will.
I just wanted to make sure it didn't.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I haven't seen it yet.
In my email trash can, because sometimes stuff ends up where it shouldn't be.
I hear you.
How does everyone feel about what we are presenting in terms of goal 4? Is there anything that needs to be like clarified or
Good to go.
Excellent.
I think we might get questions that'll lead us to all of our other goals, right? Because they're so interconnected. But I think we're prepared for that. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. I should just have it up.
Yeah, I just pulled it up just so that I could be, looking at it as well.
Lindsey, that was a great exercise, by the way.
You. I had done it in a training as well, and I was like, I found it very powerful. So I wanted to pass along the powerfulness.
Yeah, seriously. right, we are waiting on a few more friends. And I think we're all back. All right, welcome back. Okay, so as I mentioned before, 5 minutes to present a goal, and then 5 minutes for questions and supportive comments. We're not going to rush, so we may not get through all groups tonight. My real hope and intent is that by the end of next meeting, we are fully into working on our first goal. But please do not feel in any way rushed. I know that folks are still tweaking in some instances and making changes around the margins. So that's okay. So with that, is there a group that would like to present first?
I think, Panagis, did you want us to go first since you have to go?
Yeah, is that okay, Councilman Cohen?
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect. And if you guys are wondering if I'm dressed up for you, sure. Prior to coming on, I was met with elders from the Navajo tribe in Montana about the childhood vaccine. And after this, I get to meet with another school that's part of the synagogue I go to. So all very good. Sorry about that. So back-to-back meetings. But we're very excited to talk to you guys about our goal. We have 3, but we're going to touch on the first one that we think is kind of a priority because a lot will come on afterwards. And my 3-year-old found a disco light, so sorry about that. This is I promise you, she's right there. So yeah, fantastic. This was not cute. So Zeke, if you're wondering like, hey, how do I get this going? There you go. Let me share my screen and then we can go over what we put together.
Is there music?
Man, this is awesome. All right, can you guys all see this?
Yes.
Hopefully you guys aren't being distracted too much. So look, we have a lot that we want to accomplish with the medical arm of the Trauma-Informed Task Force. We think this, especially with the policies in place, especially with your type of leadership, Councilman, we really think this can be a catalyst to really make transformative change in Baltimore, not just a moment in time, but a movement. So, but with that said, we have to be conscious of kind of big surrogate outcomes to achieve in order to hit the distant ones. She's left, so let me unplug this one second. Okay, if you guys were really entertained by that, sorry about that. So with that said, we really felt that goal 1 would be incredibly valuable. And goal 1 is making sure that the key stakeholders of the city's health systems, meaning not just like when I say this, I know like your Marylands, your Hopkins, your MedStars come to mind, but we really mean everyone who has a hand also in training healthcare professionals. Your Morgan States, your Coppin States, your CCBCs who put out constant healthcare professionals, like all of them are key stakeholders and matched with the community stakeholders. Community leaders from faith-based organizations, barbershops, you know, they all need to sit down. And we saw a glimpse of that happening before, during the Freddie Gray uprisings. We saw that briefly happening. And then it lost that momentum, clearly never becoming a movement, but just a moment in time. But, you know, we strongly believe with Councilman's leadership, so the policies in place, there's going to be accountability here now. And so with the meetings of the stakeholders, this does 2 things. One is it allows the community to kind of announce their health concerns, right? So the key stakeholders from the health system can begin to listen to them and begin to understand where they're coming from. The other part that we hope it does is it gets these medical stakeholders invested in helping us, right? And I say this because in our medical community breakout rooms, you get tons of Lindseys, you get tons of Panagises, Colbys, others. We want to do good work. But you got to understand, if we don't have resources from our own institutions, we can't do great work. And so if you get the leadership involved and invested, they can allocate the resources we need to impact the community's health interests that they've identified for us. So we want to hear your thoughts on this, right? It's meant to have touch points that are going to be impactful. It's meant to prioritize health priorities of a community, and it's meant to be a bi-directional dialogue. So let me pause here, and we're open for comments, suggestions, conversations. And Lindsey and others, if I missed anything, please weigh in as well.
No, the only thing I would add is that like our focus for goal 1, 2 is really to focus on the relationships between the institutions and community members, and acknowledging that there has been a history of intentional harm by medical institutions, and that there needs to be a direct focus on repairing that harm and restitution for the harm, and focus on building trust, and that nothing else is really going to come until we are able to help achieve that. So these, in a feasible way, we're trying to figure out a way to start that process. So just wanted to kind of echo that. Barney's back on.
This is really excellent. Tamara, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I do. So I love this, but I have a question about the goal of really repairing and healing through restitution. I think that my concern is how to guarantee that the medical institutions will actually be able to follow through and back that up, because what I wouldn't want to see happen is that there is a process of trust building happening and then nothing comes through for the community, because I think there have been so many instances when people reach out and talk a good game, and then in the end, it doesn't end up panning out into something that benefits the community. And so how to ensure that there is actual real restitution that would happen.
Yeah, and Tamar, I'll begin to weigh in on this, and my colleagues can weigh in. Like, there are downstream goals that we wish to achieve. We think that's one of them. That is not one that you're spot on. This won't happen tomorrow. There's not a sense of accountability on anyone's end from a health system to kind of begin that process. But we really think that goal 1, these touch points, having these touch points become norms, having these touch points become like an expectation out of the health system, we think this can be a downstream goal, right? We think this can be achieved. So my immediate answer is I have a surrogate outcome that I want to achieve, right? If we can achieve having them meet, having them out of their health institutions into the community, right? The health institutions have felt so many years as in the community without being part of the community. If goal 1 can actually achieve that, where they feel like they're part of the fabric of a community, then having these conversations about, hey, making do for what you did in the past becomes easier to achieve. But part 1 is really that medical revolution of getting a health system to feel part of a community. If you feel part of it, they will feel accountable with it. So that is a long-term goal. My only immediate answer to that is a surrogate outcome in the beginning to achieve that. And others can weigh in, by the way, because we put a lot of thought into this. These are great downstream goals, but we recognize these are downstream goals.
Yeah,
Sorry
I'm gonna have a seizure. I would say tomorrow, yeah, that was actually, we had a lot of discussion on that point about accountability and how to ensure that that happens. We had a lot of conversations about how much power do we have as a task force in order to kind of make sure institutions are being held accountable. But I think it's kind of what Panagis is saying. I think that we're kind of focusing on getting institutions to be in the community and focus on starting to build the relationship and hoping that from there, they'll have the buy-in to want to be held accountable to these standards that we're going to set. But I think that there's a lot of logistics still to be figured out with that. But yeah, yes, Dr. Lee.
So I think this is, so as people may know, the health systems in Baltimore and surrounding 5 counties has got $35 million for planning services, particularly, and trauma. It's not only for trauma, but essentially it was for dealing with those things. I don't think there's a community, there are organizations on the planning committee. I don't think there's a community person or anybody representing the community people there. So again, from a task force, we don't control funds, but I think if we make suggestions and call out where things don't seem to be consistent with what people are saying they're doing, that there may be some opportunities, and given that there are also resources behind it, getting some more community involvement might be a very effective way of getting the community voices in there. Because I think there's agreement on what wants to do, but as we can constantly hear from people on this group, people who have lived experiences are able to identify both assets, but where some of the structural challenges are, that might be very helpful to get this group to be more more effective in achieving what they would like to do and presumably what we'd like to do.
I like Kyla's question about how will this be measured, right? And we want to approach this cautiously because, you know, we want to have a measurable outcome, right? Because that keeps you accountable. But what does that look like in this sense of making sure the community doesn't feel like this is the researching and so forth? So one thought that we always put forward is when you have these conversations, everyone, you know, and sorry, again, 3-year-old in the background, everyone is there expressing themselves. I mean, to some extent, we can have note-taking to hear people's kind of, you know, thoughts, how they prioritize, how they have their own narratives, and see how that dialogue changes over time in a sense of how does it grow, how does it evolve, what are we suddenly hearing from the community? That's an accountability outtake that we can step forward saying we want to measure how the dialogues change over time. I think that's a reasonable one. And the other part too is what the community keeps emphasizing as their health priorities, right? This is the trauma-informed task force, but trauma is, you know, almost an umbrella word that transcends so many other diseases, pathologies, and proximal risk factors that we want to hear all about it. And so that's how I think we hold ourselves accountable from goal 1. Goals 2 and 3 are more tangible that we've laid out, but goal 1 is really, can we see this notion of humanity really build between two entities where suddenly we're all viewing each other as equals? And that's going to grow naturally, right? And that's what we want to kind of see and hold ourselves accountable to. It's qualitative research for those of you who get excited about that.
Yeah, let me say, I'm really excited. I think, you know, this group both has some, as Panagi said, more sort of short-term, tangible goals. And then I think this is a big, audacious one, but I think it's really necessary for Baltimore because I do think we have this history of medical institutions, as Lindsey said, at times inadvertently and at other times less inadvertently causing harm, particularly in communities of color. And so I do think the sort of call-in approach, I think can be really effective here. And I think in terms of accountability, I do think, you know, it means something to get a call from the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. And, you know, especially, you know, I know our mayor stands behind this work and has told me personally that wherever we need him to push in, he's willing to do it. So I would just say, I think it's a good question around accountability. And I think don't underestimate the power of organized people, which is what we've got here, who are on a mission. So again, really appreciate the first goal from the medical subcommittee. Please give them a big round of applause. And thanks for being our first. And
Hey, everyone.
my daughter does not have the disco room, but oh my goodness.
This isn't a disco room. This is like a formal room that she invaded. Like she broke out of the playroom. She found and so we're all human. And luckily this is like live stream. So everyone gets to see this. So this is exciting. So
party at Dr. Panagi's house next meeting.
Council.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much to that first group. All right. Who wants to go next?
Training group can go.
Let's do it.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I welcome my colleagues to certainly chime in and add to whatever it is that where areas that gaps that I may miss. But so the Training Assessment and Evaluation Committee, our action statement is to acknowledge and address the impact of past and current oppressions that the systems perpetuate by designing, delivering, and evaluating ongoing training and support with agencies, community-based organizations, community members, and stakeholder collaboration in order to support a citywide trauma-responsive approach to Baltimore's post-traumatic growth. And our first goal that we've already began engaging in is to provide feedback on the initial agency-wide trainings. We've distinguished because there will be trainings that are going to be done with it more in-depth with these individual agencies, as well as community trainings that will also follow. But the first goal is focusing on the initial citywide trainings. And so the recommended projects in order to achieve this goal is to first collect information and meet with key partners involved in the evaluation and training, to attend, observe, and take notes on the initial agency-wide, virtual, and in-person, once we get there, trainings, develop written feedback to improve later trainings, and possibly help with, to inform these evaluations as well, and to review the evaluation plan. So the first part of that we've already started doing. We've met periodically with key partners involved in the evaluation. We've met periodically with Ann and Congressman Cohen when we needed to, and we've got other meetings set up in the near future around this training and evaluation. We have begun attending some of the library trainings that have started. I think Library Trauma 101 and a presentation by Dr. Lawrence Brown, I think, are the two trainings that we've had so far, and we've attended those and was there with the entire library system and attended some of their small breakouts, and that was well, very, very positively received. So we'll continue on with this goal as we've identified the evaluator. So once that part of the process is done and the evaluation plan is in place, we'll start to engage in the last parts of this goal as well. So anything I forgot, team? No, I just want to say also that I know that I'm biased. As a clinician, I shouldn't have bias, but my team, man, that's all I'm saying. Bomb squared. All right, that's it.
Great job, Desiree.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, you did awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any feedback from the rest of the committee? Any questions or feedback that we can use in order to strengthen this goal? Nice, guys, we stomped them. Oh yeah. Okay, all right. So if there's no feedback, that's it. Thank you all.
Awesome. And I do want to just say, again, thank you so much, Desiree. Excellent work. We were fortunate to be able to access some of the American Rescue Plan Act money, some of which to go toward training our city agencies, and some of which to develop a training specifically for community. And I know that as a subsequent goal, this group is also going to work on co-developing that community-based training and really making sure that from east to west, north to south, Baltimoreans have access, because we know that it's one thing to shift culture within city government, which I will argue till I'm blue in the face is really, really, really important, because too often we have been the catalyst of trauma instead of helping to heal it. However, we also know that right now, many of our communities are facing pretty profound mental health crises and traumatic crises as well. And I don't know about you all, but I feel like I'm just feeling it like a lot with constituents, like just people going through it in one way or another all over the place. And I think we're going to see more and more and more of that. We always, in any pandemic, after the physical health impacts, you see a lingering mental health crisis. And I feel like we're starting to see pieces of that. And I hear that from my teacher friends in schools as well. So anyway, great job to the training group. Super excited for the work and appreciate what you all are doing. If there are no further questions, who wants to go next? I'm seeing, I don't know. I think Lydell might have gotten it first, but Regina's giving me the look. So, all right, who's going? It was a tie.
A lot of people will just go.
You got it. Take it.
Scissors. All right, let's do this.
Oh, we're really doing that. I think Regina ceded to you, my friend. You're good. You don't even need to do rock, paper, scissors.
All right, cool. All right, I'm pretty good at it. Anyway, all right, so we got a couple goals in the youth group, but the goal that we're going to focus on today is the youth housing security, or youth homelessness. And we do have some follow-up questions before I get into this that will help influence maybe which goal that we want to focus on. Is we want to know more about how funding is being allocated to some of our different goals were around rec centers, around youth employment, so MOED, and we kind of understand how mental health is being worked on right now, but we also want to basically get an idea of like how funding is already being allocated to these different sections, so we can know like if there's a gap in these areas, and also how funding is being allocated within these different areas. Because like for the rec centers, for instance, we were kind of contending between this and the youth housing, was if the funding for like rec centers is going towards trauma specific services. So we just want to be able to get some more specifics on that. But we can go back down to goal 4 and address that question at another time. So our goal for youth homelessness is to decrease the rate of it from 243 to 200 by 2023. That data came from, I believe it was from Katie Yorick from Baltimore City, YHDP, BNL. And essentially some of the priorities that we have around youth homelessness are, we want to, essentially there's a huge issue of like young people, unaccompanied young people being left out on the streets of Baltimore City. It's pretty intersectional in how it impacts. There's many different services that are needed to address that issue. And so as our group, we've had like notes here, but we didn't get to really flesh them out into priorities. But some of the different things that we've discussed are the legal ramifications of youth being able to go through these different services, the availability of services to young people if they're like under a certain age, like if they would be able to actually apply to certain centers around or different shelters around the city, and the different availability, like the different services that are necessary for youth that are going through homelessness. Like, as we know, when someone is homeless, it's like an urgent issue. And what we really wanted to be able to focus on is making it a rare occurrence, or as short as possible, that the young people are homeless. Because as we know, it then impacts their other, stability, that the other areas in their life, such as the education. And if they don't have a support system, which is likely what leads to their homelessness, then we're trying to develop the other support systems. So some of the other goals that we discussed, like the mental health services, are some of the things that we would need to help address the youth homelessness once they're going through those different systems. Creating a kind of network of folks that would be able to come together to provide the different resources that are necessary. So just kind of go through the notes here and see if I'm missing anything. And also anyone from like the youth group can jump in if you feel like I've left anything out in this issue. Yeah, there have been some different areas around the city essentially where we understand that like there's a lot of young people, like the Sandlot, or and essentially there's just like a barrier to access to a lot of the shelters that are available to either young people who are accompanied by another family member um, or have to be essentially above 18. And so really want to just be able to create like a larger net around like, the young people who are going through this and experiencing this. As far as like trauma goes, like there are different services I think that are addressing like the need for recreation in the city, the need for mental health services, and the need for employment in the city. I think that all those different things also still come back into the urgency that youth experience when they're going through homelessness. So I'll stop there, but welcome to feedback and also anything else the group would like to add.
I say great job, Lydell. Really, really good stuff. I know Odette has comment/question, council member.
Thank you, Lydell, and thanks to this group for highlighting youth homelessness. It's very important, and I don't think it gets enough attention. And it does, it is such a big deal. I want to offer possibly there are spaces open for the Continuum of Care Board. So maybe we can try to get a young person who is experiencing homelessness there. As well as just having those continued dialogues. We are going to be continuing. I had a hearing in May. It all blends together around homelessness in general, and especially the increase in the population and how we can be better, particularly with ARPA funds and keeping people safe. So we're going to have that hearing again. We're going to have that hearing again in December. So would love to invite Lydell or anybody who's experienced this to be a part of that hearing, and I'll let you know.
Councilmember, could you just share with folks that don't know what the Continuum of Care Board is?
I apologize. Yes, so the Continuum of Care, every jurisdiction has a Continuum of Care committee, and it works directly with the whatever agency is assigned to have the homeless services. And money from HUD comes through the Continuum of Care in order that organization, that group, in order to be used for homeless services for homeless neighbors, shelter, care, all of that. So, and it's there's a seat for a council member. And then there are definitely seats for people currently experiencing homelessness that are on the Continuum of Care Board. So it's established by the federal rules in order to access federal money.
Excellent, thank you. And so maybe in addition to trying to get a member on that board, we could also figure out some kind of partnership between Continuum of Care and this subcommittee, specifically focused in on youth homelessness. And again, thanks, Odette, for your work and leadership on the topic, and really glad that this group is honing in that way. Dr. Phil.
The other thing, just to point out, so we used to have a very good program that was working with homeless youth, the Youth Empowerment Society. Their staff was all fired last Wednesday and let off, and the organization is currently not functioning. So we have as bad as things were before, and they were very positive. They were doing, and they focused on youth. We're doing very positive things. They've ceased to exist. So we really do have a crisis in this area that I think the task force can be very important calling attention to and trying to mobilize supports for.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I was actually on the phone with some of their staff that were laid off today, and it really is a crisis. They served a lot of kids. They were, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil and Odette, but the only drop-in youth homelessness center in the city. So that is a seriously big gap.
It's a long, complicated issue, but it's very horrible that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other question for this group.
I just had a quick question. This is just my ignorance on the topic, but is the child welfare system involved at all in this process of youth homelessness or in the emergency shelters and things like that? I know they're like a complicated agency.
It's complicated.
Yeah, a lot of time.
Yeah, it's not as much as they should be. There's also problems with that system in general, which, you know, that's a longer conversation, but yeah, and there are also young people who don't want to go anywhere near there. You know, school becomes their, you know, place where they're, although I'm speaking secondhand, so anybody who's got firsthand information should probably be speaking, but there's also the systems don't talk to each other.
Yeah, so much to do on this topic. It is a huge one, but again, thank you, Lydell, and the entire youth committee for being willing to take it on. And I know that this committee is also doing some work bringing our 3 schools of social work, Coppin, Morgan, and University of Maryland, together to create a joint certificate program that folks could come through and then hopefully stay in our city and do social work with children and families right here in Baltimore. So excited about that as well. So I think we've got time for one more group. I do not want to try to rush in and get 2 in there. But Regina, you were chomping at the bit. So do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I'll do it. Let me lower my screen so I can see. So I want to unfortunately brag a little bit because I do think that we do have the best, most thorough team on our policies committee of course, Abby and Zeke and Kevin and Nakia and Odette and Faria. I enjoy working with each and every one of them because they are fiercely thorough and think about every detail. And I appreciate every one of them as they force me to think even more. And so, of course, we had 5 goals, but the one goal we're going to concentrate on today is the identification of policies that have either currently or in the past or continue to reinforce trauma. And one of our first goals is to be able to recommend projects that would otherwise be listening sessions across the city to gain stronger insight of current traumas, inducing policies experienced daily in the community level, as well as hearing community stories and being able to figure out what those traumas are. Of course, by creating that space, we create a space for healing, as we talked about earlier. Shared experiences, of course, empowers other peoples and the communities to overcome and learn how other people have had solutions for themselves. And hopefully we could have this led by a community mediator or a licensed therapist or a counselor. But usually through this process, we can identify the specific policies or regulations that are causing individuals and communities current, past, and potential future traumas because we don't know them all. So a couple of them we wanted to target is one, recreational marijuana. It is a huge topic and it is one that the General Assembly will tackle this session, but really working on identifying how many residents are incarcerated for marijuana possession and use and determine how many are actually incarcerated for distribution and sale. Coordinate with our partners of the police department and the state's attorney's office, of course, City Hall, our trauma-informed task force, and begin to start to dialogue and tackle legislation that would get to the essence of these issues. And we know that our state's attorney has currently said that she is not prosecuting these very low-level crimes that are really taking up time and space and really are, I think, to a degree, speak to this policy is when we talk about trauma. And so we want to get to the basis of it. But of course, when we think about legislation and we think about possession and determining charges, you know, we have to also talk about reconciliation and expungement of those We can't create something that opens up the door to something that someone is in jail for. So we have to have policies in place that would also exonerate and remove those from individuals either who has already served time or are serving time for possession or use. The next one we want to get into is one that is controversial, but I think is important, especially as I did more reading on it, but it's consensual adult sex work decriminalization. Right, so human rights advocates pretty much across the country are working on decriminalizing because they believe that if we do that, consensual sex with who you want to and on what terms is not the business of the government. It is not the business of you and I. It's certainly not the business of law enforcement. And because we have made it the government's business and the law enforcement's business, it has created some unsafe practices. So decriminalization will help with alleviates, of course, violence against sex workers, especially our trans individuals, exploitation of these individuals, rape, and oftentimes murder of these individuals. It keeps sex workers from working in unsafe locations. It empowers sex workers to, of course, seek help in certain cases where violence or exploitation is occurring. And of course, it creates an environment of practicing consensual safe sex, but most importantly, secures the right to their health care. And it certainly secures the right to their own body at their time and their place when they want. And also, we talked about creating a work group so that we can, or a task force to understand this topic even more, to review, of course, the benefits of the decriminalization of sex work. And if I can be quite honest, we all know if we open a Torah or a Bible or a Quran, prostitution is in there. It's one of the oldest professions in the world. Next, I want to get into another controversial topic, which is consumption sites, right? So we have long prosecuted individuals for substance use disorder, and we have put people in jail who are essentially suffering, and they use based on their suffering. And so we talked about not only decriminalizing this, but creating a pilot program where we would have a consumption site or what they call safe drug use sites, and then supporting kind of an on-demand treatment availability within those sites. These sites are starting to pop up across the country, but most important, they are sites, people imagine them as places where people just go and they just get high and there's nothing else, but this is some place where people can, for instance, have safe needles. Nakia talked really about potentially getting your drugs tested to make sure it's not a bad bag. Make sure you're not going to overdose because someone sliced it with something else that you don't know about. Fentanyl is a big deal right now, right? A lot of people's drugs are being laced with that kind of stuff. You can also have ready available resources there for you when people are ready to, quote unquote, become sober and get help. They do reach out. And in the meantime, this is, again, in the same way as consensual sex, having a space, having a safe place, having the ability to potentially get your own prescription for naloxone, for drug overdoses, but also, again, a safe place, a place where you're not having to hide, a place where you can have a safe consumption, safe doses in a way, and also be around individuals who can help monitor that. But funding allocation, we talked about having funding from behavioral health and hopefully partner organization, whether it's a health department or health clinics, to kind of fund this pilot program to see how it goes and see how it works for us. And then the last one is environmental justice, which is a big term in the last not only year, 2 years, but 5 years. But I want to be clear about environmental justice, really talking more about it, using the EPA's definition here about what it is, but essentially reviewing policies kind of in certain specific subject area that historically and currently, and again, in the present, create environmental justice challenges and issues. And we talked about things like land use and zoning, which we know is the biggest creator of environmental justice issues, right? Live near your work physically, literally used to mean a thing, used to be okay. Not so much in 2021. You can't live down the street from the coal plant. You can't live down the street from the factory that you used to work at. It's not safe anymore. We talk about industry business standards. We're talking about product creation and product use, especially lead paint, which we don't make, but is still prevalent to this day, affecting Black and brown children, and especially in Baltimore City. We see transportation, the lack of transportation, the inability for transportation to go to places where people need it most. And most importantly for me, remembering that transportation is a service. It's a service that is paid for, and you should get the service that you're paying for every time you get on the bus. Air quality and water quality, as well as air quality and pollution, and what standards are creating them or continue to create them, and especially in communities historically disenfranchised by that. And of course, one of the biggest ones here is waste management. Supply and demand. We buy the stuff, we then throw it away, not realizing that it has to go somewhere. But in going somewhere and going back to zoning, we have placed it in places that are not the best, and very close to communities that are then bear the impact of it. And so, of course, we want to partner with cities, of course. I want to partner with like the health department, the Office of Sustainability as a guide and background to leveraging and working through these types of policies. And I think if the team wants to add something else, they're willing to do so, but I think that is it for us.
Excellent work, Delegate Boyce. Much appreciated. I will add, in 2020, we lost more folks to opioid deaths, overdose deaths in Maryland than in any other year. And when we think about, folks often cite homicide numbers in Baltimore, but we lose more than 2 times as many people to overdose than we do to murder in our city. And it just doesn't get the kind of media attention or appreciation that other deaths do. And I think that's because there's still an enormous amount of stigma around who uses drugs. And I think that's something we really need to change through harm reduction. Last thing I wanted to mention about our group is also really excited to be partnering with the mayor's office on the 911 diversion program that we are working to develop. We know that too often our mental health response in this city has not met the needs of the people we serve. It's too police involved and not enough community or clinical care. And so I know that this group is going to be working with Mayor Scott's team on improving those systems. I know that if Tisha were on this call right now, she would be very disappointed in me because we are 4 minutes over time. So apologies to you all. And if anyone has to jump, please do so. But if there is any questions for this group, now is the time. All right. Hearing and seeing none. I did want to briefly invite everybody on Friday, November 12th. Shauna, our Shauna from the task force, is going to be doing a training for the library system at 1:30 p.m. It is also, I believe, Lindsey, going to touch on epigenetic trauma as well. Shauna is excellent, and I would invite anyone to join. I know the policy group is going to be there to pay attention to it, but if anyone else has the time, I think it's going to be really, really, really good. With that, appreciate everybody taking the time tonight and being a part of this work. These are phenomenal, exciting goals that we've got going on. Next week, we're going to start to dig in. We also have the decolonizing group to present. And we are going to start to dig into the work. So again, thank you to all that presented tonight. Thank you especially to Dr. Gavin for the excellent presentation. This was phenomenal, and thank you all for continuing to show up, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.